with regards to U.S. and NATO, just like we would not want Russia to come in and start putting their tanks and missiles on our borders, either with Mexico or elsewhere, Russia says, hey, I don't want U.S. and NATO coming and making their military outposts on our borders within Ukraine.
There's an argument that it is ethnically targeted. COVID-19 attacks certain races disproportionately.
I'd shut down the FBI Hoover building on day one and reopening it the next day as a museum of the deep state.
Those are people who wouldn't get anywhere near a normal cabinet for any normal Democrat or Republican. But, ladies and gentlemen, meet the most likely future director of national intelligence, future secretary of health and human services, and future director of the FBI. And that was just a glimpse. There's so much more where that came from in terms of their controversial and at one point in our country's history disqualifying public statements. Baffling in some ways on the part of three of Trump's most out there, outlandish nominees. They are all set for their confirmation hearings later this week, and nothing has changed structurally in our politics to suggest that they won't all sail to confirmation. NBC News is reporting that the White House is stepping up their pressure campaign on Republican senators to do what the White House wants, to do what they did for Hegseth and confirm someone, in this case 3 people, with serious questions. It leads to some unease among Republicans when GOP senators sums up his colleagues' thinking on the nominees this way, quote, we'll only give so much because this is the future of the country. It's not entertainment television. Well, we don't think so anyway. It's worth pointing out, though, that the senator chose to speak anonymously. Not exactly a good sign if you think that the Republicans are going to stand in the way of Trump's will. Joining our coverage, NBC News congressional correspondent who understands this dynamic perhaps better than anyone, Julie Zirkin, and Tim's back as well. Julie, other than complaining about the lack of qualifications or the stated skepticism of vaccines on the eve of a potential bird flu or the bizarre statements that line up perfectly with Vladimir Putin in the case of Tulsi Gabbard, does anyone really think that any of these folks will be blocked?
I don't think so, Nicole. I mean, what we saw happen with Pete Hegseth on Friday, you and I were talking several times last week about the serious concerns that Republican senators had with his qualifications, with his expertise, even on the national security part. If you take aside all of the allegations that we were reporting on, that is something that at least certain Republicans cared the most about, and yet only 3 Republicans, 1 short, voted against him. And I think that is indicative of what we are going to see this week, next week, as they hear from the most controversial nominees that Trump had put forward. I think out of all 3 of those, you're looking at Tulsi Gabbard, because Republicans who care about the national security, who are frustrated that this is somebody who was a Democrat, an independent, became a Republican just before the election, and certainly had questionable visits and meetings with foreign leaders, adversaries. You played some of her comments on Putin and Russia. These are serious concerns that senators have. She went into one of her meetings with senators saying that she now apparently has an about-faced on Section 702, which is one of the nation's top surveillance programs that allows them to catch bad guys overseas. She now says she's apparently in favor of that. The problem that I keep hearing, though, from Republicans, Nicole, is that they're just not buying what she's saying. I've heard now from both sides of the aisle, from senators who say that she told them one thing, but they're not really sure if they can trust her on that. We know that the White House wants her to step up her game here on Capitol Hill. But to your point, it's going to take a real difference for those senators to get from privately saying no or publicly saying maybe to actually voting against her on the Senate floor. And I think it's also indicative of the test that Trump is putting them through.
Tim Miller, this isn't even a Trump story. This isn't even about Trump and the people he picked. He picked these people because they play well in the manosphere. The podcasters love these guys. This is a story about what a joke the Republicans have turned themselves into. And Republicans don't get to tell journalists like Julie that they care about national security. The calls about Pete Hegseth came from inside Fox News, 10 sources, and inside his family. A sister-in-law, come from anonymous sources. They all had names to them. The concerns about Tulsi Gabbard, they're on live TV. And you know what? Ask Vladimir Putin what he thinks of Tulsi Gabbard. You don't even need to take a domestic critic of Tulsi Gabbard's. But the fact that these guys are going to put on suits and trot to conferences and act like they care about security is rendered a joke if they confirm these folks?
It's a complete joke, and the whole cabinet selections have been clownish. Like, you can put ideology aside even for a second. We could talk about Tulsi and kind of a separate box. Like Hegseth and Kash Patel and RFK Jr., just from a resume standpoint, are preposterous choices to lead the agencies that they've been set to lead. They don't have the experience to do this. They are hostile to the actions that the agencies are supposed to take to safeguard the country. In the instance of Kash Patel, this has been a person that has just been as transparent as you can be, that he plans to target political foes using the power of the federal government. And to have these senators, just to do one example of this kind of the ridiculousness, the clownishness of all this, Tom Tillis, senator from North Carolina, who's got a big election coming up in 2 years, during the Pam Bondi hearing, was talking about how offensive it was that everyone was asking her hypotheticals about what she would do if Trump pardoned violent criminals. Never would Trump pardon a violent criminal. and so Tillis is going this way. 2 days later, he pardons all the violent criminals. So then the question is, okay, if you're a serious person and you just were that gullible, then you would imagine that Tom Tillis would have a lot of questions for Kash Patel, who was in league with the January 6th insurrectionists. And there's been a lot of reporting about the communications and the advocacy he had for those who attacked the Capitol. Does anybody think he's going to do that? Not really. I don't know. And the only possible hope, to not fully despair on all this is it really does only take one of them. So it's worth trying to shame and pressure them, because if that three of Collins, Murkowski, and McConnell that opposed Hegseth were to oppose any of these other nominees, you'd only need one more. But it's like, where do you find one when you've got somebody like Tom Tillis and Joni Ernst just doing totally fake performative objections and ultimately folding?